Now we have section 1.4, part 3. So if you've been watching all the videos, you've seen us discuss systematic sampling and stratified sampling, so now it's time to talk about cluster samples. Now we want to talk about cluster samples, and I will say, so stratified and systematic get confused because they both have S's in their name, but stratified and cluster get confused because we're talking about groups, and those groups, even though they're formed differently and used differently, still make these seem similar. So let's take a look at take a look at cluster samples. And so here's one possibility. We have all the classes at a college, so architecture, art history, a couple art history classes, several biology classes, all the way down to zoology. And we would randomly select certain classes and then poll or survey everyone in the classes that we choose. So here's another with our lovely blue and teal people. So we have 5 groups of people for whatever reason, however they're determined for these clusters. We select 2 clusters, and then that becomes our sample. Those 6 people become our sample. As far as an example, so let's take a look at our people again. So here are, and again, I've still clustered them, grouped them by shirt color, but for whatever reason, I'm only wanting to ask one of these groups to participate in my survey. Now again, this is a very small population, and this is not, usually we wouldn't do a cluster sample like this as far as I'm only having 12 people to choose from. However, if this were just as an example, an illustration, if I were to think of this as, cluster 1, so 1, 2, 3, and 4. I'm going to randomly choose one of them, so between 1 and 4, and I'm getting cluster 3. So I take this cluster, that becomes my sample. And then I would survey everyone wearing a pink shirt and go on about how I would do. Now, the thing is with cluster sampling is typically we don't put people in clusters based on the same qualifications that might put them in subgroups for stratified sampling. Instead, we would probably do something like, let's see, let me clear this off for a second. There we go. We might do something like this. So here we have maybe, some sort of region with different voting precincts, and we sort those out. This could be done something with zip codes, school districts, like we saw on the previous slide. It could be sections of class, but it's something that groups them together, not necessarily by characteristics of their person, but where they live or where they go to school or what classes they're taking. And then we say, okay, well, I'm going to choose precinct 5, 16, and 28, and then interview or poll every voter in those 3 precincts. So that's a cluster sampling. So they are being grouped, but usually they're being divided into sections rather than placed into subgroups. It's a very, very small distinction, but it's there. So that is cluster sampling.